You know, for thousands of years, cannabis was a staple in medicine cabinets all over the world. But today, it's right at the center of this huge, fierce debate, especially when it comes to treating chronic pain. So, what does the science actually say? Well, we're about to dive in. We're going to look at the history, the biology, and the hard evidence behind using cannabinoids for pain relief.
To really get why this conversation is so urgent, you have to start with this number: over $1 trillion. That's the estimated annual cost of the opioid epidemic just in the United States. And that's not just healthcare costs, it's lost productivity, and most tragically, it's lost lives. It is a staggering figure that just screams for safer alternatives. And that search really begins with a massive public health challenge. I mean, chronic pain isn't some rare thing. It affects nearly 1 out of every 5 people on the entire planet. It absolutely diminishes quality of life and creates this immense economic hardship for so many.
For decades, opioids were the go-to answer for that pain. But they come with this enormous risk of dependence and abuse, and that has led to a devastating reality: over 70,000 overdose deaths every single year in the U.S. alone. This isn't just a crisis, it's a catastrophe that has forced the medical world to urgently search for other options.
And that search has led many people to look backward, to a plant with a medicinal history that stretches back millennia. So now we're turning from a very modern crisis to a potentially ancient remedy: cannabis.
For centuries, cannabis was just accepted medicine. We have records of it being used in ancient China for anesthesia and in Egypt for inflammation. By the 1800s, you could buy it over the counter in the West for things like migraines. But then the 20th century brought a complete 180. The 1937 Tax Act, and later its classification as a Schedule I drug, basically slammed the door shut on its medical use. It wasn't until scientists discovered cannabinoid receptors in the 90s that the door finally cracked back open for research. And that discovery was monumental. Why? Because it revealed this: the endocannabinoid system. It turns out our own bodies are already equipped with this complex network that cannabinoids can interact with. It's a built-in system that helps regulate really fundamental things, like pain, inflammation, and even our mood. So, how does it work?
Well, the process begins pretty simply. When cannabinoids from the plant enter your body, they act like tiny keys searching for the right locks. And these locks are 2 main types of receptors in our cells. They're called CB1 and CB2.
Now, where these locks are located is absolutely crucial. CB1 receptors, they're packed into the brain and central nervous system, which is why cannabinoids like THC have those psychoactive effects. CB2 receptors, on the other hand, are mostly found in our immune cells, scattered all throughout the body. This distribution is the key to understanding how the plant can have such wide-ranging effects.
So what happens when the key turns the lock? Activating these receptors sets off a whole chain reaction. It can actually quiet down the firing of pain signals in your nerves and suppress inflammation in your tissues. The final outcome? A reduced perception of pain.
Okay, so that's the theory. That's how it's supposed to work. But the most important question is still on the table. Does it actually work in the real world? It's time to sift through the clinical evidence.
So yeah, beyond the biology and the theory, what happens when we put this to the test in controlled studies with actual patients? What's the verdict?
The answer, as you might have guessed, is complicated. For nerve pain, what's called neuropathic pain, there's moderate evidence. One study found over half of users got a solid 30% reduction in pain. Pretty good. We see similar moderate evidence for pain related to multiple sclerosis. But for conditions like fibromyalgia, headaches, or cancer pain, the results are much more mixed, limited, or just all over the map. The big takeaway here is that this is not a magic bullet.
And this complexity isn't just about whether it works or not. It's also about the very real risks and the significant roadblocks that make studying and using cannabinoids so difficult.
A major roadblock has been regulation, especially here in the U.S. By classifying cannabis as a Schedule I drug, the federal government is basically saying it has no accepted medical use. This creates massive hurdles for scientists trying to do the large-scale research we desperately need. In contrast, you have countries like Canada and Germany that have more flexible frameworks, and that's allowed for a lot more scientific exploration and patient access.
And then you have the health risks, which we have to talk about. We're talking about potential impacts on nearly every system in the body, from cognitive impairment and psychiatric issues like anxiety and paranoia, to cardiovascular and respiratory risks, especially if it's smoked. It is essential to have a balanced view, and remember, this is not a risk-free substance, not by a long shot.
So where does all of this leave us? With all that on the table, let's look at the future of pain management and what role cannabinoids might actually play in it.
If you're wondering why all the evidence we just looked at was so mixed and messy, here's the heart of the problem: a total lack of standardization. Different studies use different plant extracts, different chemical ratios, different ways of taking it, and different doses. It makes comparing their results almost impossible. It's like trying to compare apples, oranges, and, bananas.
One research paper sums up the entire situation perfectly. Promising, albeit complex. That's really the key phrase here. There is real therapeutic potential for sure, especially when you look at the failures of our current treatments. But the science is still just racing to catch up.
And all of this brings us to our final question. We have an ancient medicine, a modern crisis, and a really complex, messy body of evidence. So as we move forward, what is it going to take? Better research? Smarter regulations? Maybe just more open-mindedness? What will it take to finally get the clear, unambiguous answers that millions of people living in pain are waiting for?